the defending champion, the all-new Yamaha YZ450F.
What's up guys, Trevor Hunter here at Dirt Bike Test. We just spent a day riding this new Beta 300 RR 2-stroke. Now this isn't the race edition, it doesn't have the KYB suspension, it has the direct oil injection still. Basically they're 300 2-stroke kind of trail bike. And we had another 300 2-stroke out here, a new KTM, to kind of compare it back to back with, and we'll do kind of a more in-depth comparison once we spend more time on both these bikes and just ride them in a variety of conditions. Today we're out here in Big Bear. We rode the famous Malcolm Smith Trail and just a lot of the surrounding trails out here. We did like a 46-mile trail ride, I believe. So we got a pretty good feel for this bike. Like I said, we were able to go back and forth the KTM a little bit to help kind of nitpick some of the characteristics of this bike. And yeah, so here we go. Starting off, the motor, super strong, torquey motor. The Betas have always been really good, kind of bottom to mid power motors, and this one's no different. It doesn't have quite the bottom end, like the aggressive bottom end that I kind of remembered the Beta 300s having. It's a little smoother, a little tamer, which isn't a bad thing. It's just kind of more in that kind of TPI-ish direction where it's a lot smoother and maybe a little easier to ride, but not as exciting. But overall, yeah, that bottom to mid, super torquey. You could put this thing in third gear and climb just about anything. Just tons of torque on this bike, and it's really cool to ride, and kind of makes you almost feel like a better rider, just how easy to climb some of this stuff. But top end, not its specialty for sure, but I think a lot of 300 2-strokes in general, they're definitely the bottom to mid range, and this one kind of fits that bill perfectly. One thing with this motor and this bike kind of in general is it does kind of vibrate a lot, especially in comparison to the newer KTMs and stuff like that. There's a lot more vibration. Really, it's more of like a classic, older, kind of old school, I'd say, these days, old school 300 2-stroke engine, or bigger bore 2-stroke engine. And the KTMs with the caliper balancer and a lot of this new technology and stuff, whereas this seems to be a little bit more old school. Got the key and carburetor on there. Not quite as technologically advanced, which isn't a bad thing. This bike is definitely probably a lot more simpler. You got the carburetor, you got a battery for electric start, but other than that, you got the direct oil injection, but there's no throttle body or anything like that. So definitely overall, just in general, this motor package is more old school, and that vibration really is the biggest thing that kind of stuck out to us. As when you get used to it when you're riding and stuff, it's not that bad, but certainly better than kind of how they used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago. But definitely, comparing it to that new KTM, definitely more vibration. And so just kind of like on the fire roads and kind of choppy roads and stuff like that, you really felt it a lot. But once you got into single track and stuff, it wasn't quite as noticeable, and it wasn't all that bad. But it's a little minute difference that we noticed that, yeah, just an older school feel that this Beta has. Moving on to the suspension, it's got the Sachs fork and shock, and definitely isn't its strong suit, I would say. Having spent quite a bit of time on the Beta RR race edition with that KYB suspension front and rear, definitely doesn't feel quite as kind of supple and plush as that. But one of the biggest things we actually did with this bike is we ran like negative pressure in the fork. So typically when you bleed the fork, the air screw in the forks, you put it on the stand and kind of elevate it to get all the weight off the fork. And we did that to start, but we felt a lot of harshness in the fork. So kind of midway through our ride, and certainly the fork built pressure as we were riding, so that has something to do with it. But I know in the past, a lot of times that we've worked is we bleed the forks with the wheel on the ground, and the suspension's just compressed just a little bit. And that kind of runs like a negative air pressure in the fork, and it really helps kind of bring that supple feel to the fork. And so that was really one of the biggest things we did today, was just running that negative pressure in the fork, and it really helped this fork out a lot. Before it was really stiff, kind of deflected a lot, but once we did that, it was a little more supple, forgiving, and kind of rolled through some of the rocks and the smaller chop a little bit easier and a little more forgiving on our hands. So running it, I definitely recommend trying that negative pressure in the fork. Made a huge difference today, and definitely we'll probably be doing more of that in the future. As far as suspension goes, though, didn't make a whole lot of changes. We ran the sag at 105 millimeters, and then kind of just as we were riding, we'd play with clickers a little bit. Kind of if we were in like kind of flowing faster single track and stuff, we found that we actually stiffened up the fork 2 clicks in the compression, and that kind of helped bring the front end up, and you could be a little more aggressive when the fork wouldn't dive or kind of ride low in the stroke. But as we got kind of choppier fire roads and the rocks and stuff like that, we actually brought the clickers back out front and rear with compression, like 2-3 clicks out from stock, and just gave it a little softer, supple feel, a little more traction. So that kind of helped that a lot. Move on to the chassis and the handling. This bike is definitely has like a light feeling front end, and puts more of its weight and its emphasis on kind of the rear end of the motorcycle. So in that tight single track, it's super easy to move directions and kind of pivot, and it's a very agile bike in that way. It actually feels really light, and it's very susceptible to kind of weighting the foot pegs and kind of pivoting and, kind of making direction changes, stuff like that through the foot pegs rather than directly through the handlebars. So that's kind of one thing that was actually really liked about this bike, is just kind of the chassis and the handling. One thing that this bike does have is it comes with Maxxis Max Enduro tires, and I'd say the best thing you could do when you pick up this bike is bring home a set of tires with it. I've ridden a lot of the newer Maxxis tires and actually really like them, but these tires specifically really don't help this bike at all. The traction really didn't feel great at all, and it felt like a really stiff caught in a carcass feel, which kind of contributed to that stiff, harsh feeling suspension action. I think a lot of that could be just due to these tires, and I think we'll get this thing home now that we've ridden it once or twice with these the stock tires. We'll put some tires we're more familiar with and see. We believe that really will help this bike a lot in the traction standpoint, and then just kind of in that bump absorption standpoint as well. These tires feel super stiff, almost like AT81s, Dunlop AT81s, but worse, especially through the front end. So I think we'll put some different tires on here, maybe the newer Maxxis offerings that they just came out with. We really like those, so we'll, like I said, yeah, getting some new tires on this thing would be beneficial, and I think will really help this bike moving forward. But other than that, this bike feels pretty good. We had a little bit of a rear brake fade, so we'll go home and bleed that and see if that's something we still continue to have issues with, or if it's just a bad bleed. And I think that could be. We haven't really had any problems with the brakes and the betas in the past, so let's give that a good bleed and see if we can kind of remedy that issue moving forward. But overall, bike is super solid. Really fun bike to ride. We had a couple different test riders hopping on and off it, and everyone left it with a smile on their face. So we ran about 46 miles today. Nothing super crazy fast. A lot of second, third, fourth gear single track, just kind of cruising along. And we used about 2 gallons of gas, so I'll give you a little bit idea of the gas range. About 2 gallons of gas in that 46 miles, and had a smile on our face almost the entire time. So stay tuned at dirtbiketest.com for more. We'll have an in-depth kind of review on this bike, and we'll also be comparing this to the new KTM throttle body injected 2-stroke, and possibly some other 300 2-strokes. But until then, we'll see you out on the trail.
If you liked what you saw in this video, come check us out over at dirtbiketest.com on the webs. We have bike tests, product tests, a lot of fresh dirt, and you can even support us by clicking through our links. Hopefully, we'll see you out in the trail.